Hi everybody, welcome to today's class. So again, the class I did for chair yoga was on request, or by request I should say, and so is this one. I have been teaching a lot of what's called Yin Yoga. If you're not familiar with it, I think you're really going to like this practice, but I've been teaching it a lot lately and people seem to really enjoy it. It's a lot different than a regular, more active Yang yoga practice in that we hold poses for time. So we stay in positions that will be familiar to you if you practice yoga regularly, but there's 3 ground rules in Yin Yoga. We hold poses for time, and because this is a beginner-friendly class, we're going to probably hold poses a little bit on the lower end, maybe a minute to a minute and a half, but you can hold the poses up to 8 and 10 minutes, really depending on the level of where you're at in your practice. The second rule of Yin Yoga is that you want to find your edge. What does that mean? So I always like to use the analogy of Goldilocks and the 3 bears. You don't want it to be too hot or too cold. You want it to be just right. So the edge of sensation means that you're feeling it, but you're not pushing yourself or forcing anything. We don't want pain or burning or any like stabbing pain, but you want to feel some sort of sensation. And then the third rule in Yin Yoga is coming out of the pose is almost more important as what you're doing while you're in it. So I always like to remind people that the motto in this class is slow is the new fast. Because when you're holding a pose for time, so although on the outside this class might seem a little bit more quote unquote chill, a lot is going on in the body and we may be feeling it more when we come out of it. So think about when you've been squatting down for a while, and when you get up, you're like, oh, same thing. You want to make sure that you honor your body and come out of it nice and slow, because really you will feel it in many cases more than when you're in it. So holding your pose for time, number 1, finding your personal edge of sensation, and then number 3, coming out of it, resetting, slow is the new fast. So let's get into it. Yin Yoga is all about hydrating the fascia, the tissues, and the joints, which is different than a Yang yoga practice where we focus more on the muscles. So here's what we're going to do today. We're just going to focus on the area of our hips and our low back. And this practice can be done at any time of the day, and it'll be a very brief Yin Yoga practice. At some point, I'm going to add some longer Yin Yoga videos. If that's something that you're interested in, please continue to let me know, because I really want to offer and create things that people want. So just starting in a comfortable seat here, I'm going to have you just place your hands on your knees. If you want to close down the eyes, and your legs can be in any position that's comfortable, crisscross applesauce or easy pose. And if you're finding that your knees are elevated higher than your hips or your pelvis, you might want to sit on a pillow or a blanket. Just settling in here and seeing how everything feels. So what we're going to do before we start our practice is we're going to tap. So instead of doing a brief meditation, I'm going to introduce you to what's called EFT, or Emotional Freedom Technique. And so right along the side of, and it doesn't matter which hand you do this on, it's called the karate chop point. And so these different points that we do in EFT tapping are also associated with the meridian lines of energy, which is what we're focusing on in Yin Yoga. So it pairs really, really nicely with this practice. And the intention is we're just going to take maybe our 3 fingers, or you can even use like the karate chop point here. That's why it's called the karate chop point. And just apply some very mild pressure, medium pressure here. And the intention is that tapping on this meridian point, just like what we're going to be doing throughout the class, is like an acupressure point. It's kind of the same framework as when you go get acupuncture, but we're just using the tapping and the pressure of our own body to help tap into that parasympathetic nervous system. It can really help with reducing cortisol. So just closing down the eyes, just taking a few breaths here. So this is going to be a very brief introduction to tapping, because typically this kind of practice involves a little bit more. There's more points and there's more associated with it. But just tapping here, just so that we can kind of set ourselves up for a nice relaxed practice. And as always, continue to breathe so that energy doesn't get stuck. If you are noticing when you're in a pose that things feel tense or stuck, really use that breath to help create movement. And it will really help propel kind of getting some of those things released. One more breath. And then bringing the hands to the lap, just relax here and see how that feels. And then slowly make your way to your back. So coming all the way down on your mat, and if you don't have a mat at home, just especially for this practice, you can use just a rug or anywhere on the floor. Let's walk our feet out to the wide edges of the mat, and let's bring one knee in and then the other. My hands are on my belly, but really they can be off to the side as well. And this is just windshield wipering the legs. This is a really nice release on the low back. So continue to breathe and move, just gently starting to warm up the area we're going to target today. And then land here where the left knee is out and the right knee comes in. Awesome. We're going to stay here for about 8 breaths. So if you want to keep your hands on the belly, another option is bringing them to this goal pose position. Just really just doing what feels good in the upper body, because the target area here is in the hips. 8 breaths. Remember, if you're feeling any kind of stuck or stagnant energy, as you inhale, think about really sending the breath into that area of the body that might need a little bit of a release. Another important thing to know about yin is that what hydrates the tissues and the fascia is not just lengthening, but also compression. So you'll see at some point, some of the things that we're going to do, our tissues are going to be compressed and not necessarily being stretched or lengthened. Couple more breaths here. And then when you're ready, it's important to think before you move in this class, because you want to remind yourself to move slow with intention. Because we're very used to just going from one thing to the other quickly. So really try to think about how slow you're going to move. I like to say, like, think about moving through mud or honey or something like that. So here we go. Let's slowly start to come up. Bring everything back to neutral here for a moment, and maybe even just letting the knees rest on each other. Just resetting, seeing how everything feels. One breath in, one breath out. And then let's do the same thing on the other side. So now we're going to bring the right knee off to the right, and the left knee is going to come in. So if you have at home, if you notice it's just maybe a little bit too intense to have this right knee kind of hanging out here, you can always put like a pillow or some sort of a prop underneath. 8 breaths here. So a lot of times with Yin Yoga, at some point, you'll feel maybe a release, and that may be a sign from your body that you can go a little bit further or deeper into the pose. But for purposes of today, especially if this is a new practice for you, I just recommend staying put and just noticing how things feel. Because a lot of times with a class like this, you might feel it even more the next day. So one more breath here. And then remember, before we start to move, think about slow and intentional, coming on back, maybe just shifting that low back. I like to sometimes bring it up just slightly and then press everything back down into the mat to kind of reset, and then press the knees in towards one another. This is called constructive rest. And just take a few breaths here, and then we'll move into the next set of poses. So the next thing that we're going to do, we're going to transition into a low lunge position. So coming up and making your way all the way up to all fours. And so from here, we're going to start on the right side. We're just going to bring the right foot to the outside of our right hand. So your two hands are going to be on the left side of this right foot. And what we're going to do is we're going to do something called lizard lunge. So adjust that back knee so that the focus here is we're really getting into this left hip flexor. But remember what I said about compressing the tissues. So we're lengthening the tissues and the fascia along the left, but we're also doing a lot for this right here, because by compressing the tissues on the right side, we're also hydrating and stimulating on that side as well. So there's a lot of different options here. If you have issues with your knee, you can actually fold your mat over, maybe use a blanket to support the knee. So my left foot is flat, but you can also curl the toes, which kind of helps relieve a little bit of the pressure along the left knee. So pick where you want to be, hands here, and depending on where you're at in your practice, you can also come down to the forearms to get a little bit more sensation. For purposes of today, I'm just going to stay up here. And we're going to just stay here for about 8 breaths again. So we've already been here for a few. And again, keep breathing. It's a really important part of this class. Because again, especially with the hips are an area of our body that tends to hold on to a lot of physical, mental, and emotional stress. And rarely I find that, unless you practice yoga or other martial arts, that people don't really focus on this area in the body. And so it can tend to be very tight and constricted. So just pay attention, and you might need to back off. So if the way I look might be a little bit too intense, maybe come back and don't have so much of the length that I had along that left side. Remember that Goldilocks syndrome. You have to find your edge. Keep breathing. And I always like to remind people, I want you to notice what comes up during this practice. It is common to experience physical discomfort, and I don't mean pain, but you are really kind of playing your edge here of sensation, and so sometimes that can be a little bit uncomfortable. It could also be mentally irritable, like you might think, well, how long is this going to last? It's really important to continue to focus on your breath. And one of the things that I really like to do when I practice this kind of a class in particular is pair it with affirmations to help kind of get me through. And I'll introduce one to you when we go to the other side. 2 more breaths. And remember, slow is the new fast. So as you come up, you're going to feel quite a bit of sensation, is my guess. And so one of the ways that I like to reset after a lizard lunge is what's called a half split. So what we're doing is we're just taking a moment here to lengthen on this side and compress on the other. We're not going to be here long. This is just what's called a rebound pose or a reset. But really do whatever feels good here. Sometimes I like to move in between, a little dynamic movement. And then continuing to breathe. And then let's set it up for the other side. So same thing. And maybe you just want to settle here for just a moment in this tabletop position. I always like to check in and notice if I can feel a difference between one side and the other when I haven't done the other side yet. So here we go. Bringing that left foot up. The hands are to the right now of that left foot. And then just figuring out where you want to be with this right hip, flat or curled. And we'll get right into it on this other side. 8 breaths. And the affirmation that I'll introduce you to today is I accept this day with love and joy. I accept this day with love and joy. One more time. I accept this day with love and joy. And one of the things about affirmations is that just notice what comes up. Sometimes we may not have much of a reaction, and other times we may feel or notice something that comes up in the body when we say these affirmations, and just take notice of that. 2 more breaths. Okay, here we go. Slow is the new fast. So nice and slow. We'll transition into our rebound pose, that half split, or really whatever feels good in the body. So curling the toes towards the face, maybe rocking back and forth a little bit. Keep just moving, or maybe you're still. And then when you're ready, we'll just kind of go back to that neutral tabletop for just a moment and check in and see how everything feels here. Let's just do a little bit of movement, coming back, sitting on the heels. This is called child's pose. Forehead down. Arms can be nice and relaxed here, just melted on the mat, or if you want to release the shoulders a little bit, you can bring them alongside the body. And with child's pose, if this just doesn't feel comfortable in the body, because my knees are together, you can always bring them really wide so that your belly has a little bit more space to get closer to the mat. So your option here, we're just going to rest here for about 5 breaths. One more breath. Slowly come on up to a seat, and we're going to find our last pose before our final Shavasana. And so this is one of my favorites. I actually have a lot of favorites though. So this is a butterfly pose. What that means is we're going to bring the feet together and we're going to make this diamond shape with our legs. And the further away your feet are from your body is going to make you feel it more in your spine or your low back or in the inside seam of your leg. So for purposes of what we're going to do here, we're really trying to get on the inside seam of the leg. So just find that sweet spot, that edge of sensation where you want to be, and then slowly start to fold. So if you're at home and you have props, this class I didn't require any props because most people don't have bolsters and blocks at home, but really you can use anything. If you want to support the head, you can even just use your hands, just so that your neck isn't just dangling like this. And again, trying to get a nice long sensation of stretching and along the sides of the spine, the low back, the outside area of the hips, inside seam, and just continuing to breathe. Notice that when you breathe, it's really helping to expand or stretch certain areas, and then as you exhale, everything constricts and goes back. So really focusing on continuing to use the breath here. I'm just taking note of how things feel. Do you feel like you need to back off a little bit? Or are you at a point where maybe you feel like you can go a little bit further or deeper into the pose? Just really paying attention to what your body is telling you. Few more breaths. And then remember, when you're ready to move out of this, come out of it nice and slow. Depending on where you're at, don't just pop right up. Maybe you want to curl your back a little bit. Just see how everything feels. Or maybe rolling the shoulders back here. And let's make our way to our back for our final resting pose, Shavasana. And so this is probably the most important part of any yoga class. You give yourself an opportunity. Ideally, you want to give yourself a good amount of time, but at least a minute, which is probably much too short, but really just reaping the benefits of the practice. So getting comfortable, I like to just bring my arms out, palms face up. If straightening the legs hurts or bothers your low back, you can come back to that constructive rest position that we did earlier. So just find what works in your body and just see how everything feels. So with affirmations, if this is something that you notice doesn't set well with you, or if you notice that it's something that feels good when you say it, it's a really great pairing when you can journal and practice this type of a class, because a lot of times it brings things up that we may not have known were there. because those affirmations really tap into the subconscious mind, which is what really guides a lot of our beliefs, our thinking, and our actions. And because every thought that we think is directly connected to all of the different cells in our body, what we think impacts the health of our body and how we feel in our heart and the peace that we feel in our mind. And then slowly kind of waking yourself back up, wiggling fingers and toes, maybe full body stretch, or bringing the knees into the chest. I always like to kind of rock side to side here, give my low back one last little bit of love and massage, and then meet me in a seated position. And bringing the hands to heart center, closing down the eyes, thanking yourself for trying something new or carving out some time just for you. Thank you, my yoga friends. Namaste. Hey, Carl. I'm done. I think this is so cute. Yeah, I wonder if Ray's in this. I would love it if he, oh, he's not in it being there.